Okay, welcome back everyone. I think we'll just make a start now. So I hope you are feeling fully caffeinated. And I will now just move on to session 2, which we've entitled Analytics, Tools and Technology, so fairly broad there. And our first speaker is Ian Ritchie, CBE. So I'm just going to read out a little bit about Ian before he stands up. So imagine it's late 1990 and you've just met a nice man named Tim Berners-Lee who starts telling you about his proposed system called the World Wide Web. Ian Ritchie was there, but he didn't buy it. A short story about information, connectivity and learning from mistakes. Ian founded and managed Office Workstations Limited, or OWL, in Edinburgh in 1984. OWL became the first and largest supplier of hypertext hypermedia authoring tools, which was a forerunner to the World Wide Web. For personal computers based on its guide product. OWL was sold to Panasonic of Japan in December 1989, and Ian is the author of new media published from the digital revolution. So I'm delighted to now pass over to Ian, and he's going to tell us more about it.
Thanks, Joe. You hear me okay? I had to pitch to the TED. That thing you just heard was the pitch I did for the TED conference. And I pitched this to the TED conference, and they came back and said, you've got 4 minutes. So I thought, well, that's a bit challenging. Anyway, so we've got a wee bit longer this morning, but you have to sort of, tell a story to get into a TED conference and do a speech like that. So that's why I did it. But the whole basis of it is not really this. Why did I not buy it? The whole basis of this talk is where the web came from. The technology that drives today's electronic publishing revolution. The web has transformed everything. It's transformed all sorts of publishing. It's transformed commerce. It's transformed broadcasting. It's just transformed everything. And so where did that come from? And it's not really entirely obvious. So maybe some of you know this story, but I'll give you my. And my take starts in 1945. This copy of Life magazine. I bought it in a shop in Seattle, actually, of all things, and it was wrapped in plastic and had a label on the front. And that what I've listed there is what was on the label. So that was what the people who classified it and stuck it in the shop thought of the important articles inside this Life magazine. US occupies Japan, the French flew fashion, black market boom in Berlin, and Ritchie in Vienna. It doesn't mention this little label in front of this plastic wrapper. The most important, arguably the most important article in computer science in the 20th century, which was an article called That's When We Think, by a chap called Vannevar Bush. So let's talk a wee bit about Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was the chief scientific advisor to President Roosevelt in the Second World War, an MIT professor. He was in charge of all the scientific work undertaken by the US government, including obviously the Manhattan Project to develop the H-bomb. He was very, very concerned with scientific communication and also secrecy, because obviously the scientists working on something like the Manhattan Project had to transmit information to each other very rapidly, but they also had to keep secret information that they didn't want the enemy to see, and so forth, and it all had to be very, very confidential and so forth. So these are the sort of things that were going through Vannevar Bush's mind when he wrote this article. And the article was first published in Atlantic Monthly in July 1945. It's available on the web. I strongly recommend you read it. It's a fantastic piece of work. It describes the future, and it describes in enormous detail the way in which, now, remember 1945, computers didn't really exist. Now, Vannevar Bush was one of a handful of people who would have known about the work at MIT and at Philadelphia and at the Colossus development in Bletchley Park. But, by and large, mechanical electronic computing processes were really in their absolute infancy. There was no such thing really as the first arguable computers came post-war in Philadelphia and Manchester and Cambridge and so forth. So he was forecasting the future, and he was saying, let's look towards the future and see the kind of things that should be done, because the way in which information, so this is his prediction of the computer, he said the methods of transmitting and reviewing the results of research are generations old. I mean, go back to scientific publishing in this 17th century, and now are totally inadequate for their purposes. So the idea that you have a library full of classified information with Dewey Decimal codes or something telling you which book is on which subject and so forth, is completely hopeless in terms of actually finding the information inside these documents. What you really want is a system where you can go to a book, you can read a piece, you can see a thing that's relevant, you can then immediately find the other things that are relevant to that piece of work. in other books, somewhere in this library. So somewhere in this library there are 50 other books that are relevant to this piece I'm reading. You want to be able to move to those very quickly. He says this is just impossible. This is just not the way it works. And so the human mind doesn't work that way. It works by association. There's one item in its grasp that snaps instantly to the next, suggests about association of thoughts in accordance with some intricate web of trails carried by the cells of the brain. And he says, whenever there's a logical process, there's an opportunity for a machine to help with that process. So he wanted us to consider a future device for individual use, a sort of mechanized private file in a library. And he called it the Memex. And the artist in Life magazine drew up a picture of the Memex. He didn't actually even foresee electronic storage of data. The Memex was driven from microfilm readers, so there was microfilm there. The switching between the pages of the microfilm was done electronically. But he couldn't really quite even get his head around the fact that all the data would be held digitally. So the Memex is there, and the interesting thing about the Memex is the Memex was a machine which linked information. So when the user is building a trail, he names it. Before them, the two items to be joined, there's two viewing screens. He clicks and clicks and he joins them. Okay, so the editors, the people who prepare this material, do all this linking up for you. And the user taps a single key and the two items are permanently joined. Thereafter, at any time when one of these items is in view, the other can be instantly called by tapping the button. Most of the contents are purchased, ready for insertion: books, pictures, current periodicals, newspapers, 5,000 pages of material a day, it says, 100 years to fill the repository. I mean, this is all obviously speculation. A whole new forms of encyclopedias will appear, many made with a host of associated trails. The lawyer will write such opinions and decisions. The physician will look at earlier cases. The historian can follow any type of contemporary trails which lead of all of our civilization. Vannevar Bush in 1945 was predicting with incredible accuracy the World Wide Web that arrived in 1995, 50 years afterwards. So I strongly recommend you have a look at, just do a quick search online, but you can find this article very, very easily. And it's there's other things it covers as well, but this is the significant piece. So one of the people who read this article was a young Air Force officer called Doug Engelbart. Doug Engelbart was in the US Air Force. He was reading this in a library in the Far East. He read this article. He was completely inspired by it. He thought, this was really very, very significant. And it kind of directed the rest of his life. The rest of his life, he was really sort of dedicated to how do you actually make something happen here? How do we make this type of machine work? Along the way, I've listed some of the things that Doug is very well known for. He developed a graphic user interface. He developed windowing computers. He developed a personal computer. I mean, he was the person who designed the world's first personal computer. He developed a mouse, made the mouse out of wood. That was the very first mouse. And other intuitive interfaces, a 5-finger chord keyboard he was very keen on. He developed this whole concept of hypertext storage and retrieval. Networking communications, these machines were networked. In fact, Doug was the second person on the ARPANET. The ARPANET started in Los Angeles. Stanford Research Institute was the second node in the ARPANET. When I saw Doug 25 years ago now, he was going back to Silicon Valley, or he was going back to an ARPANET 25th anniversary meeting, and teleconferencing. He did video and audio and document sharing teleconferencing. And all of this was in 1968. And in fact, this is people say this was the most important computing demonstration ever. It was the Fall Joint Computer Conference in 1968 in San Francisco. And here is
the program that I'm going to describe to you is quickly characterizable by saying, if in your office you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display backed up by a computer that was alive for you all day and was instantly responsive, instantly responsive to every action you had, how much value could you derive from that? Well, this basically characterizes.
So what Doug was doing was he was implementing the vision of Vannevar Bush in the
Research Center at Stanford Research Institute. But there's another thing I can do. There's a root text that I have.
So he's got a mouse, and you can see he's moving his pointer around, and he's clicking, and he's got graphics, and he's got text technology.
So here's what I do with a picture drawing capability. Here's a slight map. I start from work, and here's the route I seem to have to go to pick up all the materials. And that's my plan for getting home tonight. But if I want to, I can say, the library, what am I supposed to pick up there? I can just point to that, and oh, I see, overdue books.
Well, this was non-trivial. This is the little operating station he's using. He's got his 5-finger keyboard on the left-hand side, core keyboard. He almost never touches the QWERTY keyboard. And he's got his mouse, which he invented in order to do this, on the right hand. He always said, why did people pick up the mouse and they didn't pick up the core keyboard? The core keyboard was really, really useful. But obviously, we're all very much tied to that. And then finally, in this demonstration, this is 1968, remember, 1968, you think of the technology in 1968, he demonstrates some teleconferences, and just shows that as well. So he brings in one of his colleagues, he's in San Francisco, his colleague's in Palo Alto, 30 miles away, and he brings them in, and they both work on the same document, and they see each other and talk to each other. It's a phenomenal piece of work. So that was a demonstration that blew everybody away. Of course, he invented the personal computer, but his personal computer cost about $5 million. So in practice, it wasn't exactly going to take over the world that year. But it was very much some people have described Doug as the Moses, the guy who saw the promised land. He didn't actually get there, but he saw it first of all. Another guy who kind of saw the promised land was Ted Nelson. Ted is not really a technologist. Ted is a kind of a publicist and communicator and so forth. Actually, his family came from Hollywood, so he was kind of but he was very engaged. He wrote a book called Literary Machines, about how the world would be moving. This is in the early 70s, late 60s. This is when computers were used for payroll things and scheduling deliveries and all these sort of. They weren't really used for the kind of things we use them for today. Online access to lots and lots of books and records and so forth. Ted Nelson was the guy who gave hypertext its name. He coined the name hypertext. As I say, he wrote a book called Literary Machines. He proselytated in this area for a long, long time. He's still alive and, as far as I know, active, but his project was very much, he had this project called Xanadu, which was going to link all the information in the world to all the other information in the world. For some bizarre reason, Ted never really took to the web, which is obviously the implementation of Xanadu. But for some reason, Ted didn't quite see it that way. And I think probably because it's not as pure. I mean, the web is a very unstructured thing, and it's very much done from the bottom up. It's not very. I mean, I think if it had been XML from the beginning, and it had all been data had all been managed properly and so forth, then Ted would have taken to it better. But anyway, that was Ted. The other guy that I would name as a key person, you never hear of him in the research, is a chap called Peter Brown. Peter Brown was a professor at the University of Kent in Canterbury. And I came across him in 1984. I'd gone down to meet with his wife, who was the chairman of the British Computer Society's Electronic Publishing Specialist, and I said to her, who in Britain is doing any work in electronic publishing? I'd set up my company to do work in electronic publishing on the emerging workstation type machines. The Apple Macintosh was launched in 1984. And we knew it was coming. We'd seen an early copy of it and so forth. And we'd worked on the idea, the ICL PERT, which was a big scientific workstation. So we had the skills to do workstation work. And we decided that we were going to build applications for the emerging workstation market. So the Apple Macintosh was the first example of that. Of course, Microsoft launched Windows shortly afterwards. There were other ones. Digital equipment, digital research had launched a Windows machine. VisiCorp had launched a Windows machine. So the Windows sort of graphics workstation GUI type interface was coming fast. And we decided we were going to work on electronic publishing in this area. And we went to see this this lady who was chair of the Electronic Publishing Special Group, and we said to her, who's doing interesting work in the UK on electronic publishing? And she said, nobody. Just nobody. She gave me a list of half a dozen people to go and see in the States, and I went to see them. So I followed up there. She says, while you're here though, why don't you pop in and see my husband, Peter? He's been doing some interesting stuff. He'd been working on a scientific workstation, and on this particular, it's a Unix type machine, and the manual was on the machine. It was online, and so you could pull up the manual at any time, but he noticed that when any of the researchers were doing any work on the computer, they would always take the manual off the shelf and look at it. He said, why is that? And the reason he concluded was it's so difficult to read, to find what you need in a manual, on an online manual, but it's really easy to find it on paper, and that's daft. He said, that's crazy. There has to be better doing this. So he devised He didn't know it was called hypertext for this. So we commercialized it and turned it into this product. So this is Guide for the Macintosh. This was launched in August 1986. And that's the advert we put in the in Backworld that month, August 86. Guide takes the hype out of hypertext. Of course, we'll try to put the hype into hypertext, but that's and that's the Macintosh. A very, very first early Macintosh, 9-inch screen, black and white. The world was in black and white these days, and this is the sort of thing that we did with this. I mean, you click on that third, that one there, the Malaysia MMC Metal. You click on that button, and it rolls out into a drop-down menu. You've got a thing called a note. So you click on another thing, you get a note. You click on that, you go from document to document. So forth. This was early hypertext. One of the interesting things about this is that Peter Brown, being a good computer scientist, didn't actually implement a hypertext link, because hypertext links he regarded was go-tos, and go-tos, everybody knows in computer science, are harmful. So he had a drop-down link, he had stretch text, and he had notes, but he didn't put a hypertext link in. We had to add the we found it just didn't work with that hypertext link. So we added the hypertext link. Of course, the solution in later years to the go-to considered harmful has been Google, which is a come from, so that kind of solves the go-to problems. Okay, so we developed this product over the next few years. We became, we moved into color. This is the product in 1990 for Microsoft Windows 3.1. And here's a bit of demonstration of the technology.
One of the problems in dealing with vast quantities of information stored in computers is finding what you're looking for.
We'll try and zip through this a wee bit.
Or linked together,
so this is our
information is combined,
you click and you go from document to document
in virtually limitless ways. Links can be placed anywhere within your body of information. They help you organize your data and create a logical path or roadmap for people to follow.
We also implemented embedded video. This was in the the 80s, so embedded video in those days meant an extra card in your PC and a video disc recorder, a video disc player which was about this size, and the discs were this sort of size, so it was all a bit hero scare. But that was the system we had implemented. And we were the largest providers of hypertext in the 80s.
Even information on what?
This was, of course, at that time a $0 million business, so whatever. But as I say, we were the largest player in this game, and we actually sold the company in '89, as Joe mentioned, to Panasonic. And the reason I was interested in Panasonic is, I was sitting with this, this interactive document stuff, and I'm thinking, this has to be embedded. This has to be sort of with every. This has to come free with every machine, And we built a piece of our technology called Guide Reader, which was free. You could freely distribute. So if you wrote a document in Guide, you could send it to anybody, they could all read it, so that was fine. And I got over that sort of free distribution business. But we did really feel that this had to be embedded, this had to be something that was sort of built into the system, and so forth. And when Panasonic approached me, I thought, well, geez, these are the biggest consumer electronic guys on the planet. They could build an ebook, they could build a kind of, I mean, obviously not an iPad, but a kind of, a book that would publish, if you ever been to Japan, you'll see big piles of comics next to the kiosks and the railway stations and stuff of manga comics, And I thought, yeah, then maybe they could do that. Maybe they could publish an electronic manga comic that people would update and read on the train or whatever. And I thought, yeah, these are the guys who could really, cut this properly. Unfortunately, they didn't have the vision that I had. So what we ended up doing after we were bought by Panasonic. When you've got a DVD player and a DVD drive, and it comes up with menus and scenes and extras and all that stuff, we did all the architecture for that. So that was the way we were used post-acquisition by Panasonic. So, I should have mentioned along the way that hypertext was gaining, and these are both 1988 type publications. So hypertext would begin to gain a bit of recognition. So, getting towards the conclusion. In 1990, in late November 1990, I was at a conference in Paris at Versailles, and this nice chap walked up to me, but I'd never met before, nice guy. He said, "Are you Ian Ritchie?" And I said, yeah. He said, "Oh, I've got to talk to you." So I went to the bar and we had a beer, and he told me about his World Wide Web, which he said would transform the world, would take over everything, and everybody would use it to communicate with everybody else. And I thought that's really interesting because he's like one researcher, and his whole World Wide Web was on his computer in his office in CERN. I mean, but he was, it was quite, I remember it very vividly, he was completely convinced that his bloody technology would take over the world and everybody would use it, you know, and it sounded so barking mad. Because I knew, I mean, I was in the hypertext industry, I knew all the hypertext players, you know, Brown University, Carnegie Mellon, what do you call it, the Xerox PARC, you know, they all had hypertext solutions, and they were much more likely to be the successful ones than some researcher in CERN whose entire World Wide Web was on his computer in his office, you know. However, so I didn't really, and also, by the way, he couldn't pay for anything, being a researcher and so forth. We would have happily done work for him if he'd been able to pay for it. He wanted us to write the browser because at the time his web was just text-based. There was no graphics, there was no fonts. There wasn't even a mouse interface. In bold, and there was a number behind it. You press the number on your keyboard and that fired the button, so you went from document to document. So he wanted a browser, and he'd envisaged a browser very like what we'd had with what we were doing in Guide, and he'd seen our Guide stuff and so forth, and he thought, that's perfect. You guys could write the browser for it. So I didn't. But I wasn't the only one. This is the Tim's book, Weaving the Web, on page 27. He talks about how we bumped into each other at Versailles, and how he pitched to me, and they've already done the difficult bit, I thought, so I tried to persuade them I had an internet connection. They were friendly enough, but they too were unconvinced. Actually, the other thing that you may remember is that the internet at that time, this is 1990, the internet at that time was completely restricted to non-commercial use. So it was government, defence, academics. The internet was not available for commercial use. We, as a commercial company, couldn't even get on the internet. So that wasn't really available to us. So maybe I didn't quite see the potential of the internet. So that was the story. When we went forward, Tim wasn't really recognised by the hypertext community either. In 1992, I think it was, or 3, it was, no, it was 92, his paper was rejected for the hypertext conference as not being particularly innovative and so forth. And 1993 was the year I went to the conference, the hypertext conference, which was in Seattle. And I saw Mark Andreessen demonstrating on a kind of table like that, you know, just a computer and stuff, a browser for the World Wide Web. And immediately I saw it, I thought, yeah, that's the answer. This is definitely, this is going to be really, really massive. You know, just the minute you saw it, you thought this is going to do the business. So that was really the story. And when it came to '94, I chaired the hypertext conference, which was here in Edinburgh. And two of my keynote speakers were Tim Berners-Lee and Doug Engelbart, so it's the two together. And we had no opposition in having those two, and Jakob Nielsen, if any of you know the area, Jakob Nielsen was the third keynote speaker, so they're great key people. So anyway, when you're pitching a thing to a TED conference and you want it to have a bit of a life afterwards, you've got to do something that makes a wee bit of a splash. So I did a piece at the end, which I'll now play for you.
So that puts me in pretty illustrious company. There's a guy called Dick Rowe, who was at Decca Records and turned down the Beatles. There's a guy called Gary Kildall, who went flying his plane when IBM came looking for an upgrade system for the IBM PC. And he wasn't there, so they went back to see Bill Gates. And there were 12 publishers who turned down J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, I guess. On the other hand, there's Mark Andreessen, who wrote the world's first browser for the World Wide Web. And according to Fortune magazine, he's worth $700 million. But is he happy?
And if you want to have a look at the TED, it's obviously online. I'm trying to have half a million views, about 488,000, so, you know, please. Okay, thanks a lot.
Are there any questions for Ian? If you do have one, raise your hand and Graham will come to you with the microphone.
I just say, Pete Burnham from University of Edinburgh here at Dina. I was delighted. I'm not sure whether we bumped into each other or not, but there was a time around about that mid-80s, but before that in Edinburgh with things like EMAS and the rest of it. So there was a quasi-hypertext, because you could use eView, for example, and zap around the place. And so it was a truly rich place to be. And so it was, so the idea of not seeing something is really not obviously don't blame yourself. Because there were so many different possibilities. And as you indicated, this bloke in the garage doing this operating system called DOS, I'm sure you wouldn't have given him the time of day either.
No, I didn't. I don't blame myself for passing on Tim because he didn't have any money. And anyway, what was the I do blame myself when I saw Mark Andreessen demonstrating the web.
Yeah.
I had all the people. I could have easily put a team together. We could have built a big web company, and I didn't do that. That was the dumb thing. That was the one that I shouldn't have missed.
But I think the point you made just now about your lack of exposure to the internet.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were inside the walled garden, you know, where you've got email going back to the 80s and you can retrieve it, etc., etc., it was part of a world which you just supposed.
We had
you were supposing another sort of world,
yeah,
which you were right in the middle of it, and you just supposed.
Yeah. We had implemented our system over internet, over networking.
Yeah.
We put a system in a lawyer's office, and they had an office in Bristol and one in London. And if you were in Bristol and you saw a document and you clicked on a link, and it had to come from London, you could go away and make a cup of tea before it would arrive, because networks were not fast enough. You know, obviously CERN was a different environment. CERN, you click on a button, it just happens straight away. But in the real world, in the 80s, networking wasn't that fast, at least commercial networking.
So my question, my question is going to be this question of, about if people are looking for innovations where changes are. Often when you look at an area, you see that it's a step back in functionality, that it doesn't do everything that you know something should do. But what would be your advice for those who are confronted with an opportunity, but actually they don't see, they see the downside rather than the upside? Yeah,
well, that's actually what I spent my life doing, because since the last 20 years I've been doing startup companies, and I do startup companies in this area. So I tend to look for people with a little bit of secret sauce. That it has to be something that's going to be big in the future, but isn't big today, and you can build it under the radar until you get a substantial market, and then you can sell it to one of the big guys. That's the kind of formula that kind of works. And so we've done that a few times. So the thing to do is look at technology and the way it's developing, and obviously at the moment, I mean, in the 80s it was personal computing, in the 90s it was internet, this decade, last decade's all been about mobile, now we're moving on to Internet of Things. So look at Internet of Things and think, okay, who can exploit this idea of having, intelligent light bulbs or intelligent whatever, or the next thing beyond that, speculative computing, who's going to have wearable devices that tell each other things. These are the things that the big guys are not into yet, haven't got their brain around it, but innovators can do that. So that's the thing, to always sort of look forward and say, the technology, it's kind of, when you look back on it, it's inevitable. If you look back in the 90s, it was inevitable by the year 2000, computers would be fast enough to process and deliver video. That has transformed everything. That means, digital broadcasting, interactive, all that type of stuff. That was inevitable, that was going to happen. And yet it still takes people by surprise. So look forward and see where technology is going to go, and then sort of be ready for it.
Okay, I think there was one more question just over there? Or one down here at the front? Sorry, Graham. And we'll just take this last one and then...
I have just a quick question. What are social and political implications for you of developing the internet?
Sorry, can you just...
Okay, I'll just repeat your question. You said what were the social and political implications? The social and political implications are the ones that, obviously the web community worried about a lot. I remember saying to Tim Berners-Lee in '94 when he came to my conference, the web had just been announced, but nobody knew about it, really, to be honest. He was in that process moving from Geneva to MIT, because typically Europeans, we said, oh, we don't think it's, we want to support this. One thing that should be on CERN's record forever is that CERN actually kicked it out. And basically they said, we're a physics research centre, we're not, we don't do computer science, Of course, nowadays they claim, one of the big things in the CERN statement is the place where the World Wide Web was born, but at the time they weren't remotely interested. So he was saying, okay, what are the dangers here? The openness, it drives people to communicate, we know this, and then it also allows people to be repressed. Governments can switch off, connections and so forth. So the battle is always this way between openness and, the big battle at the moment is net neutrality, which is going on in the States because some of the big cable companies have done deals with broadcasters and so forth, and with so they're looking for high And that's all kind of wrong. But you know, unless we keep an eye on these things, it's not going to work out. So these are the kind of social, I mean, pretty obvious sort of things. But yeah, unless we guard all this, then it's you know, it can be corrupted, and we can lose a lot of what we have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian.
I may have microphone now.
So, yeah.
Supposed to be on. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick
Okay.
I'm just not quick enough on the other one. Right, so our next speaker is Mark Hahnel. So talking about innovative new startups, it's quite apt that he should go on after Ian. Mark's the founder of figshare, an open data tool that allows researchers to publish all of their data in a citable, searchable, and shareable manner. Mark's a former stem cell biologist, having completed his PhD in London and previously studied at Newcastle and Leeds. He's passionate about open science and the potential it has to revolutionise the research community. I'll just pass over to Mark.
Thanks. So first disclaimer is Graham, who's been running around with Mike, gave me this title here, so if I skew a bit away from that,
it's all my fault.
It's because I've just tried to crowbar it in towards that. And the other thing there is it's open data, so it's open academic data I'm going to be talking about mainly, not necessarily open government data. So if you're here to hear that, early lunch. The other thing I wanted to mention actually was my connection to Graham goes way back. When I was a PhD student, I set up a blogging platform, and Viva la Evolution was the tagline of that, and that was the logo of it in the middle of the little revolution fist. So that's
it was your title, not mine. So
yeah.
Blame yourself then, Mark.
So saying it's not, I'm not going to talk about open government data. First slide's about open government data. So when I was, I mean, it's a tough act to follow with all those stories, really, and I hadn't heard of Vannevar Bush before, but it's really interesting to see, you know, his problems that he had, and him saying that we should be doing things better and we should be disseminating content better, research content better. That's brilliant. And I mean, if you look at open data, open government data, the benefits are there. You know, all of that transparency and democratic control in countries where they have democratic governments and what have you. That's fantastic. So he wanted, you know, a way to better share the content of research. So I don't know if he's alive still today, but we have the World Wide Web. Dissemination of content on the internet has been solved. So if I want to share videos, data sets, anything, I can share that. So he'd probably be pretty happy, right? Well, there's one thing that doesn't make that perfect, and that is, well, does everyone have access to the content? So in the UK now, if it's funded with public money, then they have to make that available. We heard before how that's not perfect, but that's not really the idea here. It's this, if you have a platform to share all the research and everybody has to make it openly available, then Vannevar will be happy, you know? We've got where we want it to be. You have the content going out there, you have everything sorted, so what's the problem? Well, this is a slide I had to put together for a different talk, which was where do you think academic publishing will be in 10 years? And it's hard because we've gone from this in the 1700s to this now. And you know, if you're thinking about 10 years ago, iPads didn't exist. So it's hard to imagine this concept of what is going to come next. But at the same time, what's actually changed? You had these paper documents that were being printed out and sent around to everyone. And now we have these digital-based paper documents that are just disseminated faster. So it's the whole, you know, Henry Ford thing. What if you ask what people wanted when he was producing cars, they say faster horses. These are your faster horses right now. You can get those paper documents. So who's going to change all this? Who has an idea about moving this forward? Well, the reason I put the open government slide up is because government funders, people like that, they know the benefits. The system in academia is tainted massively by the reward system. But that's not the only problem. There's other problems. Government data is mainly homogeneous, so you have lots of data, spreadsheet data with columns and rows, and it's pretty easy to get into. But they do understand that it's important to get this stuff out there, so as was mentioned in the talk beforehand, the Wellcome Trust did put out all their data. So this is a kind of first step. You know, it's academic policy data as opposed to academic data. But they put it out there. It's not a case of if you put it out there, then they will come. But they did come, and as we heard about, people started, they put the data on figshare, which was nice, because a lot of the time people say, well, I'm not sure my funder will allow me to put data on figshare. So when the funders themselves put data on figshare, it kind of reassures them. And, you know, people dug into this, as we saw. Elsevier came out with these big highs. You know, people weren't expecting that Elsevier to be bossing academia, open access. And then, you know, Open Knowledge came out and said, all these people helped do something. If you build it, they won't necessarily come, but people did come. People built apps on top of that data. So, you know, the funders and the government, they know that if you put interesting data out there, people do something about it, and you get this kind of improvement. So people drew attention to the fact that this isn't a perfect system. The whole talk we saw beforehand about this isn't a perfect system was because the data was made available. And as was mentioned, more and more people made their data available from different places. But still, we're still sharing faster horses here. I mean, in academia, the currency is papers. As an academic, I wanted to get as many papers as I could out there so I could get as high up as I could in the academic period. And you know, the whole idea that 0.5% of PhD students in the UK make it to PI level is something that I didn't know, but yeah, I'd still go back into that system and think, well, I'm in the top 0.5, push a bit more, play the game. Change that. There is no incentive about the people who pay wages. So that's fantastic. So they've changed the way they're measuring academics. They're going to be measured on products, not on publications. If you look around and see different funders in different areas, are they all having this same? For me, it's kind of the four-pronged attack. It goes recommend open access, recommend open data, mandate open access, mandate open data. And pretty much globally in the Western world, we're somewhere on that track. So you know you're going to get to the end point. It's just how can we get there faster and what tools can we have to make it better? So if you look around, Neelie Cruz of Vice President for the European Commission, this is a big Horizon 2020, she says in the middle there, that's why we'll progressively open access to data too. Great. And we encourage, we're asking national funding bodies to do the same. So it's coming. You're going to have to do it. In America, not only have you got the NSF, the NIH, and we included humanities in there as well. The idea that, I mean, so one thing we always have a problem with is we're a part of digital science, which Timo spoke about earlier today. Digital science is a fantastic incubator. The problem is there's the word science in it, so people always ask me, what about the humanities? And it's the same, it's dissemination of content on the internet. Humanities has content, life sciences has content. And NEH is committed to timely and rapid data distribution, as is the NIH and the NSF. You know, thanks to People Power and the OSTP, there was a petition that people were asked to sign. It was another one of these petitions, make publicly funded research in America open access. And amazingly, they came back and said, yeah, okay, that's a great idea. Here's 100 million to do it. And we're going to be requiring researchers to better account for and manage the digital data resulting from federally funded scientific research. Because going back to Vannevar Bush, you can tell I've never heard of him, because I might be getting his name wrong every time here. It sounded something like that. But he's saying, you know, if we have the tools to make this stuff, to share this content, why the hell are we still doing it in the same way that he was frustrated with in 1945, sharing papers? And so, well done the White House, they're saying we should, the digital data, that was the products of my research. I made videos, I made data sets. As of right now, I have 3 academic from my PhD, they've got 5 static images in each. That isn't my research. But you know, 3 papers, it's what would go on my CV if I was an academic still. And then in the UK, brilliantly is leading the way. And these are the funder policies. I usually use this slide to say that they're great at making policies, but they're not great at supporting it with funding. So the white circles towards the end are kind of, actually, it's those 4 points I was talking about towards mandating open data. That's kind of all the way across. So you can see there's a few white dots still about, but EPSRC, one of the biggest funders in the UK, as of May the 1st, 2015, you have to make all of your digital objects, all of your research outputs available. So on the open data and open academic data side of things, why as an academic would I be bothered about sharing my files to go along with my papers when the incentive structure is still kind of a couple of years away? And so these are some of the things we get told a lot as to why people want to share their data through figshare. And you know, there's nice things like visualization is cool in the format I produced it. So the idea that academic publishers don't support videos is outrageous. If you think about any other industry that has been slightly touched by the web, every single one of them is doing everything in the best possible format. You can stream live TV, you can stream Netflix. Why can't publishers have a video that you play? Why do I have to download it and hope to open it up? That's early web for me. But realistically, that's just nice carrots. You know, some of those things at the bottom. Simplicity, you know, as well as moral and ethical obligations. Putting all of your research data on figshare can help promote your research and raise your profile. Moral and ethical obligations, realistically, all I care about is the top three. Legislative change and funder policies. The people who pay my wages are changing what they're doing, so I have to adapt to that, and I have to make sure that I'm the best in this new wave of open data. So going back to this slide again, that's great. We're hearing about, you know, publishers starting to who are the ones controlling the content. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, and you can quiz me on that afterwards. But what's forcing the publishers to even change what they're doing? And it's this whole, Jason Preem calls this the decoupling of the scholarly article, in that there's so many things that go into a journal and into a publishing platform, and can you get that elsewhere? And there's some interesting things, you know, like marketing on Twitter and stuff like that, but, you know, it could work. The one thing I'm always unconvinced about there is peer review. I haven't seen many ways. Arfon's here, who's doing something with peer review from GitHub, so he can tell me I'm wrong there. But I haven't seen big uptake in any of these new innovative models for doing peer review. So, but if there's this, it doesn't really matter. Journals are service providers anyway. So what's the problem there? The money, the flow of money is changing. It's not coming from institutions anymore. Or some of it is, but it's starting to shift towards these APC charges. So the author is now the person who is going to be in charge of this, their money. So you have to give them something that ticks all their boxes for them. So going forward, what can you do that will tick all their boxes? And publishers are wise to the fact that technology can automate things and make things better. So I mentioned digital science. Publishers get a bad rep. Rightly so on a lot of points, but also they're the innovative ones. I wasn't aware until I came out of academia that it's often the authors themselves, the academics themselves, who are the ones slowing everything down. You know, you can say about peer review, ages ago, Nature put open commenting on their platform and nobody used it. PubMed Central is now doing it. So you can't, you know, they can't be accused of not trying to try innovative new things. It's just the academics don't use it because they're not incentivized to do it. So digital science, part of Macmillan Publishers has started looking at using research tools to better academic publishing, better dissemination. Clause Labs, there's a few other things. You can see they're getting involved in this space. They're all a bit controversial, but this is already upon us. The idea that publishing is changing, there's innovative new things happening, and so if we're talking about open data, you know, open data in academic publishing, you kind of think, well, that's what's happening with Google Trends on big data, you know, it's kind of coming in 5-10 years, maybe we'll get to the point where data will be commonplace, even though these funders are saying it has to be. But there's some journals who already are data journals. That's academic publishers publishing data journals. And you got, at the beginning of the year, PLOS have to be commended for this. PLOS made 30 million profits last year as a not-for-profit. They could have just lowered their prices.
Yeah.
But that's not innovation in scholarly publishing, really. It's a good thing. But they went out and said they had to do 3 blog posts because of the uproar, because people went nuts over this because they didn't word it perfectly. But they mandated that if you publish with PLOS, PLOS 1 is the biggest journal in terms of volume in the world, and if you publish with them, you have to make all of the digital files available with you. And as I say, you can see there, they released the post, and then they did an update, and then they did a new blog post, because people lost their minds over it. So publishers are starting to do things, some of them better than others, some of them aren't even thinking about it, some of them are doing it purely to protect their business models. Okay. But at figshare, we're thinking, well, if we're going to have to play the game, there is a game, and it's led by academics wanting the currency to be papers. Because as we heard before, some of these academics have, I'm 10 years into my career playing this game. I am not going to do anything unless my funders, the people who are going to award me tenure, tell me to do something different. So the publishers are wise to this. The publishers are thinking, well, if the currency is still going to be papers, what can we do to make publishing better? What can we do to tick the funder boxes? If the authors are going to have to make their data available, if we take it off them, can we charge them a little extra to take it off them? Can we add some value add to our pool of services that we already offer? Who else is going to do it otherwise? So at figshare, we work with publishers. And, they're all moving forward. I mean, Taylor and Francis there is what people consider a closed access journal, but they're putting some of their content out in front of the paywall now so that it's more discoverable, people can do more with it because they know it's going to be useful in the future. So they're thinking about it, they're moving. It might not be fast enough for a lot of people in this room, but they are moving. And the stuff we do for them is kind of, if you have a data set, put it in the journal, put it in the article. You can put it anywhere else, that's cool, that's brilliant. Put it on figshare, but or put it on CCAN, or Data Hubio. Data Hub's just called Data Hub, but because it's an .io domain, I always call it Data Hubio. But we can embed the files into the article. If Figure 1 is 15 videos, why can't Figure 1 be 15 videos? If it was in the New York Times, it would be 15 videos. They wouldn't have a screenshot of a video and then say, click here to download the video on your iPad. So why aren't we kind of getting there? And so we do that with, that's a factor 1,000 one. Nature, scientific data, they say the data is here, you can ping it up. So the technology exists. We can do lots of cool stuff to make the data available within the article. But then you're getting into this area, and I think this is the whole thing to think about going forward. And my end point, which is a few minutes away, is kind of going to get to this whole idea of, does it really matter where all of this stuff lives? Does it really matter if Elsevier has the content? And before Peter Murray interrupts, I'll explain what I mean by that. And so we make everything available. So if we visualize some data sets for PLOS, we make it available in the little portal they have on Figshare. So this is plos.figshare.com. They're doing cool stuff. They asked us to convert 200,000 data sets from HTML format into CSV, so it's going to be reusable so people can do cool stuff with it in the future. Because they see the benefits of open government data. They know that people will build on top of the research. And if you're talking about, citations is the currency, that's because it's the best display of reuse that they had at the time when that came out. Now we can track reuse of data in so many different ways. So they want to get those data sets out there and see if they can get their data reused the most. And, does it matter that it lives on PLOS? So we're on the PLOS portal on Figshare. Well, everything in that PLOS portal on Figshare is part of the bigger corpus of Figshare. If anybody here wanted to go and download everything on Figshare now, you can go and pull it. You can get a copy of all of the data. People often question us and say, well, you're related to Macmillan. Macmillan is an investor. How do we know you're not going to go bad? And it's kind of, well, all the old publishing models were built on old publishing models. We were born open and we will stay open because we have business models on top of open. It doesn't make any sense to go backwards. If something changes in the next 10 years and there's this whole new business model, then we're going to have to adapt to that. But everything is here. If you can go and get the content, we're not going to close it. If somebody does want to go and download everything that's on figshare, that would be really nice, because people always ask us how persistent is the data, and if I say, well, everyone in this room has a copy of it, so even if half of us die in a bus crash on the way to the bar tonight, still loads of copies of the data. And then you start thinking about, well, this is just a filter of some content. A filter of some content in some buckets on the internet. And, you know, does it have to be a publisher? We're working with institutions to give them filters of their content in a bucket on the internet. They can still say, this is the impact of all of our research, just because you filter it in different ways. One of the consequences that is coming of this open data mandate is you already have too many papers to read. There's already so much stuff being produced. And you could say that's a bad thing, you could say that's the best thing ever. There's all this stuff, there's all this research happening. If you have all the data too, then it's going to be a tidal wave of information. I'm not going to be able to cope with it. So we need more filters. Our sister company, altmetric.com, is fantastic for filtering content like that. There's another one, Impact Story or Plum Analytics, they do the same thing. But this is a filter of some content on the internet. That's all you need to know. It's openly available, anyone can go in and get it. And then the thing for me is, where are we going? Because you hear all about these things, cool stuff that can be done with data. We're still at the point, yeah, let's get that data out there. And this is a tweet from yesterday. Wow, there's 2,500 malaria data sets on figshare. Next problem, how do you filter and use that? That is the question. You know, if we're saying, great, there's all this data, you can access it anywhere, what use is that to anyone? You know, who cares? Well, the technology is already out there to do some pretty cool stuff with it. You throw an Excel spreadsheet at Wolfram Alpha. This is their demo one, so it might be a bit, you know. This is a problem. We've spoken to Wolfram Alpha, and you can't get a 100% success rate if you throw a file type at it. But this is an example of some of the stuff you can do. You throw an Excel spreadsheet at it, and without anything, it just returns all this for you. So this is just from throwing one Excel spreadsheet. We have the tools to play with the data already, you know? If I was a researcher and I was going to, why would I make my data available? Because if you make your data available, then we'll do all this for you. And other people might reuse it. And if the currency is changing, then you're going to get more reuse for your data. And so what is this kind of, where are we going to be in the next few years, and what is my prediction for how we can do this better? Well, what I was saying about the data being in a bucket, and this is my whole point about it doesn't really matter where the data lives. The data might be that you text mine PubMed Central. The data might be that it's a data set that's held by Elsevier. But, you know, there's all these amazing sources where you can grab stuff from and you want to pull it together. And this is kind of, for me, the next thing is, it's never going to be, you might be able to do some cool stuff with computers and robots and looking for patterns and saying, if we just filter all of it. But you need that human knowledge. You need people to know, I know that breast cancer mutations look like this in a gene. We might get to the point where that does it for it. But if you can just get to a point, I think there's going to be an ideal situation where people just build these amazing web and browser apps that just say, if I grab some content from there, or just search the internet and say, give me the content that is in CSV format, that is marked up with this metadata, that has these tags, that was done by this machine, then you can just pull it all together. And that's where these efficiencies that, you know, open government data is seeing, this is where you'll start to see these efficiencies in academia. There is a massive asterisk next to my, it doesn't matter where it lives, obviously, and some of the people I spoke about previously might not adhere to these asterisks. But there's a few things that if we want to make this work, you have to do these things right now for me. So persistent identifiers are essential. This is links to non-papers, so non-text-based content where people are saying, I've reused this, I'm citing this. And between 1997 and 2008, and this is in astronomy journals, and you can see how many of them were broken. You know, if you're saying I'm reusing that content and you want to get credit for reused my content, you need persistent identifiers. You need that link to be managed so that when you say, I want to talk to that data set but done by this person, everything needs an identifier. Because you can say, well, you know, we're trusted, we're Harvard. No, Harvard breaks links too. All of these are academic places where the links broke. So that's one key thing. You need to have persistent identifiers to the files. The second thing is APIs. If you're building anything now and it doesn't have an API, don't ever expect anybody to look at it in 5 years. Because you need to say, if I'm going to build a tool that scrapes the web for data, how am I going to get to your data? On your site, on your, you know, WordPress site. One of the final things is open access. If you do have an API and it does have a persistent identifier, my machine goes out and grabs your file, and it actually goes to grab your file, hits a paywall, it's not going to grab your file. So if I can find it, if I can go out and grab it, then what are we kind of missing? Advocacy. As we've heard about so far in this talk already, today already, there's so much that people don't know about and people don't care about. In terms of, as an academic, I don't care. I've got enough on my plate. I spend all my day at the lab and then I go out with a few beers with my friends. You want me to spend extra time marking up metadata for every single file I've done? No chance. So there needs to be explanations of the benefits. Again, open government data has been fantastic with showing success stories of open data. My talking about the Wellcome Trust data and releasing their data, that's all shouting about a success story here. And this is my final slide here. You know, you can say, well, does everything come out of academia? Is academia the most important person in this space? I'm not going to say yet. I'm just saying it's a very big creator of the world's knowledge. If you think about, you know, socioeconomic data, if you think about stem cells, which were my research, changing the future of medicine, if you think about materials and graphene and all the work that's been done on that, or even if you talk about the Higgs boson and the idea that understanding the universe a little bit better because of the research that was done there is happening. Higgs boson data is openly available. I don't care that it's not somewhere that ticks all of those boxes there. So that's my future of open data. Viva the revolution.
Thank you, Mark. You can see there's a question already, and I think if we just go up to Peter first and down forward.
I've done a talk before that the last slide was called the Peter Murray Russ slides, and it just had answers to the questions I thought he was going to answer. Maybe still the first question.
Okay, I'll be quick, Mark. Wonderful talk. Let me pick up on APIs, because the publishers are all saying, don't go out and text mine. Use our APIs, it's much better. You don't get our adverts. APIs can be used for good, or they can be used for evil. Google has an API. How many people trust Google? I'm not going to ask. How many people trust the NSA? So it's about trust. So I'm going to say APIs and all the rest of it, where do you put your data? You put it somewhere. Trust. I trust Mark Hahnel. I do not, at the moment, trust Digital Science. I don't distrust them. There are other names I won't mention, but they're listening on the stream, whom I certainly don't trust. Right. So we have to have trusting mechanisms, which mean an independent audit of the process, privacy audit. We have to have an independent audit that they are making everything available. Those are the two problems with API are snooping and control.
Thanks. And it is true. I mean, as you say, you can use an API and hit Playwall. You can, I mean, iOS 8 is going to have amazing ways that you can link your APIs with your data, your wearable technology app, to their health app. It's a bit terrifying that everybody's going to jump on board, and then Apple's going to have everybody's personal data. It's a good point.
Yeah, I think Corey was next.
Thanks. I like that presentation as well, and I had a follow-on to that trust question, which is, if you want people to trust you, what about making torrents, a monthly torrent available of your whole data set, and make your unique identifiers into hashes of the data, so that even if you disappear, any data set can be uniquely identified, independent of your service.
Both really great ideas, particularly the torrent one. I know that there's torrents of PLOS papers out there, so it's a great idea to put that out. And then, as you say, it might solve the problem of trust. If people do, CERN, if you could do it back and forth all this data, it'd make my life a lot easier. One thing we do with, in terms of ensuring that if we go away, the data's still available, there are insurance policies, like there's one out of Stanford called CLOCKS, control lots of copies, keep stuff safe. And with the persistent identifiers, if we go away, you click that link, it'll take you, it's activated in Stanford and 12 repositories around the world. So it is just as much as we can, so the hash is a good thing and everything else.
Okay, I think it's time for maybe one more.
Yeah. If I could snip 2 questions in and reduce the comment. So one, actually, as a lab statistician, putting data out is great, but I think you've also got to promote the ease of robust statistical methods, which go for exploration rather than fast summary, because there's going to be lots of easy, quick messages out if you don't really get into the data and see where the dirt is. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a must, I think, to go and decorate around part of your advocacy, and I hope it really is. Mm-hmm. And the second thing, leading on from the link rot argument that you're making, is the fact that we know that web changes over time. It always does. So what you link to, even if it works, might be different from when you referenced it. And secondly, that it may not be there because it hasn't been archived somewhere. So there's a hyperlink project, which I hope you will add to your link rot argument as well. So there's 2 questions in there perhaps. One, do you have a plan to promote good, robust statistical ideas and methods that is as easily available as data is available? Mm-hmm. So that people just do it by accident, so to speak, use it. And secondly, do you have plans to add reference rot to your argument about link rot?
So the second question first, I know Portico and IEEE just got money from the Sloan Foundation to investigate that, which we're trying to be a part of. It's a great point. The other question was about, the statistical analysis. And if I go back to that slide, that's actually, I should have given them a reference. That's a group called Motley out of San Francisco, and they're trying to work with us at the moment because they did a blog post last week where they said, we can do loads of cool stuff. Like throwing an Excel spreadsheet at Wolfram and it'll do all this cool stuff for you. That is where I think we can go 2 ways. So the government is coming with the sticks, that's brilliant, so we just focus on carrots. So the 2 carrots angles we're going with are, 1, at the point at which you save your file, you can start grabbing metadata and make it automated so that the academics don't even notice they're doing it. The other way you can go is, when I make my stuff available, what's the cool stuff that you can do for me? And is it run a t-test? Is it do stuff like that? It's some murky water still, because, I got an email from a guy who runs something called Web Plot Digitizer. So it'll take all the graphs that haven't got the data behind them and grab all the data based on the most accurate things they can do. But then you get into the kind of murky water, well, that's not the exact results. That might be great for some use cases, but should we put it on everything? The great question is.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Okay, so our final speaker in this session is John Gilbey.
From the future.
Project management of the future. So John Gilbey is a writer, photographer, educator and project manager at Aberystwyth University in Wales. For the past 2 decades, his fiction and non-fiction stories have appeared in the likes of Nature, New Scientist and The Guardian. John's science fiction stories often take place in the tangible few decades to come, allowing him to play with scientific ideas while working within the framework of reality. His first-hand experiences with science and the culture of science inform the stories. I'll just hand it over to John.
Thank you very much. Is this microphone working for all you good people? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Yes. Ah, right, you're here. Good.
Right.
You're still alive. That's always good to see. Right. It's great being from Wales to be in Edinburgh at this very exciting time. I mean, of course, the trams are now running. But no, seriously, thank you.
Cheers.
The people of Wales are looking what happens in September very, very closely for reasons you'll probably understand. So, exciting times. Quick question for you. Could I have some feedback from you. I know it's late in the morning, but can you put your hands up if you're an academic? Okay, hands up. Publisher? Student? Editor? Writer? Any
Other.
Physician? All right. No literary agents, are there? I was hoping. Publishing. Oh, hello. See me afterwards. Right. Yes. Blah, blah, blah. Put the keyboard on. I'll use the clicker. Right. Who am I? Yes, I'm a writer of science fiction stories, author of scurrilous academic tales. You'll see them in Times Higher and places like that. Mender of broken dreams. That's sort of a softer way of saying project management of failed projects. That is to say, hopefully, it's a failing project that I come in and mend. You'll never be short of a job if you're doing that. I'm a former research scientist. It didn't exactly throw me out, but, you know, I've got on to do other things. I teach computer science, and I take pictures of stuff, which is always very nice. At the risk of sounding like a minor Simpsons character, you may have seen me in Nature New Scientist, Nature Physics, Science High, what used to be called the International Herald Tribune, and the Guardian. Beware, science fiction writers are very, very dangerous people, with respect to our colleague Doctor over there. I don't include him in this necessarily, although reading Rapture of the Nerds, I'm beginning to wonder. I've done some terrible things in the last few years, I want to confess to you. This story that appeared at the end of 2012, which accounts for the title, I placed a large asteroid off the east coast of Africa, which meant that the African Rift Valley became an arm of the Indian Ocean, which was highly radioactive with all sorts of hilarious consequences. Various other unpleasant things happened. It's on the web, you can look at it, outside the paywall on Nature's site. I destroyed most of the useful crops because of an escape from a bioweapons laboratory. You know, terrible, terrible things. I showed people the folly of believing in data unquestioningly in a virtual environment. That was actually my first one in Nature, and the illustration, which are universally wonderful in Nature Futures, is actually a digital representation of a stream of urine. You don't get that very often in publication, and not get paid for it. But I do have a romantic side, as all science fiction writers do. This was a short story I wrote for the House magazine of the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, which I thought was a very august journal and everything. And then they sent me this proof of the mock-up they'd done to go with the story. Now, I hasten to add, it's not as racy a story as this might lead you to believe. They kiss once, that's it. But it was a story about the discovery that the act of falling in love caused a perturbation in a high-energy physics experiment in a linear accelerator. So you can see their angle on it. But I was very surprised that this apparently quite calm and sensible lady editor commissioned this picture. But that's probably another story. So, that's who I am. I have a model organism which I use for this. It's a bit nicer than Arabidopsis as a way of working on research. The University of Rural England. It's a fictional organisation. It probably should exist, but it doesn't. It's now got a past, a present, and a future for the various threads of discussion. And it's got the usual human weaknesses. They're not superheroes, although they really try to be quite a lot of the time. Things are not always as they seem, and of course it's a terribly, terribly dangerous place to be. One of the porters was actually killed a few years ago. He was decapitated by a single sheet of A4 paper that had materialised from a future business meeting where there was an experiment in time travel going on. And of course you'll have to wait and see the blog posts to get forwards to the time when it was sent back to find out exactly what happened. I hope I live long enough. There we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about project management. Now don't all immediately walk out the door. Project management has a bad name, but it can be really, really used to it, even in publishing. The basis of it is, this is the way it was sold to me originally by a gentleman from Edinburgh. You need to get the job out of the door, on time, on budget, and with the right quality. Now, if you are ever dealing with project managers and recruiting one, the first question when they come in the door should be, how do we know when this project is complete? If they don't ask that, they're probably not a very good project manager. Because projects have this terrible, terrible habit of getting hold of people. And we can do this, and oh, and that, and everything. And you end up with something a bit like the internet. Oh, wait, no. But projects do fail for all these horrible, horrible reasons. There's no valid business case. I don't even know what a business case is necessarily in terms of what we're talking about today, but we need one. Watch me later. Poor quality, confusion, lack of direction, poor communication, poor estimation of cost and duration, poor scheduling of resources. Any of these look familiar to anyone? Hands up if you've been involved in a project. Hands up if you've been in a project that's got into difficulties. You're among friends. So, what do we think, people? About 30 or 40% of projects have a problem of some sort. Do you recognise any of these traits in projects?
All of them.
All of them, right. And CLM is my sort of acronym for career limiting moves. Sure. As I've had a number of careers, you can make your own conclusion. As publishing folk and academics, what are your publishing horizons? Hands up, your next print deadline is your limit of your horizon. I'm alone in this, obviously. No, be brave, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, next financial quarter. Okay. 1 year? 5 years? Maybe 50? 50 years? Excellent. Next century? Excellent. Well, we'll answer some questions later. Change is all around us. Publishing most of all, possibly, at the moment, in the way things are changing. And this is an example to show you how I think it is sneaking up on us. Take the London skyline. Why not? Everybody else has. In 2009, I took the picture at the bottom. You've got, let's see if this works. You've got halls. Think of it in terms of the traditional publishing houses. Then down in the city, you've got some young pretenders. You've got the Gherkin, you've got lots of cranes and stuff. And up here, March this year, you've got the Gherkin almost confused, almost concealed by this young pretender, the cheese grater. You've got the walkie-talkie that's appeared out of nowhere. How did this happen? You walk across Westminster Bridge every day, you don't see the difference. You travel to London once in a blue moon like I do, and these things jump out at you. There are other cycles going on. The tide goes in and out. Spring and autumn. All these things conflated upon each other. And I think this is what is happening in the publishing industry, as I see it as a writer, or as one person once put it to me, a content provider, which I think he meant as a compliment, but I'm not really sure. It made me sound as though I should have a barcode stamped on my forehead somewhere. You could view, perhaps, this as the e-book revolution. You know, slightly top-heavy, a bit ungainly, and doesn't really seem to fit in with its friends. Just a personal view. Don't know why I keep putting this down. Change happens suddenly. This is Aberystwyth. The building at the end is a public library. It's called the Town Library for reasons I'll elaborate on later. It used to be the Town Hall. I turned round and suddenly it's the Town Library because they found that they couldn't fit into the old Carnegie building anymore. And you can get a very decent latte there and it's nice. My big worry is that in the same amount of time, they're going to decide that it's going to be more serving of Aberystwyth population as a tanning salon than a nail bar, which seems to be what's happening to most of them. Then there's the old and the new. One of the things I do to raise an honest pound, or two, not much more, is I contribute to the country diary of The Guardian. This is the old format, as you buy the paper. It's on the leader page, so it's quite nicely positioned. And if you're in favour with the editor, you get a nice little woodblock shoved at the top. It's actually not to do with favour completely, because the errors and corrections column is above the country diary. And because of the constraints of PageMaker, if they're sort of giving or taking away in terms of errors, you either get a woodblock or you don't. But you get 320 words. That's your lot. That's the old format. Recently they've started doing a web format. That one. Which means you can send them a picture as well. Which, until a few years ago, well, very few years ago, caused them grave mental confusion because they weren't actually allowed to receive attachments on their Guardian email accounts. You had to go through all sorts of shenanigans to make that work. So you get to have the same page layout almost. You've got the nice woodblock without the constraints of anything else. You get. I don't know quite how they know I drive a Vauxhall, but I'm sure there's someone working away in the back of my browsers. I know that tells them. And you get the picture, and you get comments. So it's properly Web 2. Well, I mean, you always got comments originally, but nobody else saw them. You just got a packet from the editor, which would have a letter in it, usually on lined paper, usually very tightly written in green ink, saying what you'd said about the spotted woodpecker couldn't possibly have happened, and telling you you're wrong. Now they tell you this way, so everybody knows you don't know what the spotted woodpecker does. Who knew? But the two things are very different. They're trying to look the same, but all the plumbing's different. The reasoning behind it is different. Are things really as they appear? If you take a cell phone mast and you cover it in branches, does that make it a tree? Are you just concealing the changes in functionality? Does it matter? Well, it matters in terms of what we want in terms of futures. As a speculator, and I use the word advisedly, because people who predict the future get large sums of money. I get about, well, a three-figure sum for a story. Other people make more, I understand. I posit three arguments of potential futures. The steady state. Us as publishers, as content providers, continue in small, modest, incremental changes. Then there can be step changes, where things change shape very quickly, like the arrival of the internet. Then there are the surprise parties, also called the fairy godmother department. The fairy godmother department, someone once wrote that every established bureaucracy has one. I think it was Robert Hahnel, it might be a mistake. There's one single very old person works in this department, is often off sick, but occasionally it puts down the knitting long enough to take something off the in tray, do something extraordinary to it, and send it out to the world. Step changes, things like virtual reality. How many people used Second Life when it came out? How many use it now? Right, okay. Let the record show quite a few people were interested, but not anymore. Life has moved on with other step changes. Is that a reasonable thing? Yeah. So we need to be slightly careful. I took the picture deliberately when I was on Battery Street in San Francisco in 2008, and it raised a lot of excitement because you could see a physical representation of something virtual. Then the surprise parties. These are some of the ones from the University of Rural England. The things that have happened speculatively in fiction, none of these are real, but because of the, I try to write based on physical laws, potentially it might happen. The artificial life form that had its consciousness made from a construct of real people decide they're going to blackmail people to raise the funds for the repair of the system they find themselves living in. That's one of the future stories. Then I developed a temporal portal which allowed dead research leaders to be brought back and put on the payroll in time for the research assessment exercise, which, people actually looked at that quite closely when it came out. That was Time Tara a few years ago. And digitally supported thought-controlled higher animals. That was a very nasty warfare experiment, fictional, which trained the European lynx to go and attack particular people in mountainous areas of the Middle East. targeting individuals to take them out of circulation without the appearance of snipers or anything else, through the thought control of the animal concerned. I'm glad to say that the upshot was very, very unpleasant for the person training the animal. It turned out that it was a two-directional thing, and the animal got to control the person when it got really cross with them. So justice was served. But these are the sorts of things that take a step away, but in an unpredictable direction. We might think, well, you've got to have cat pictures, this is about the internet. Do I really care? I'm happy enough, surely. I'll just snug into this quilt and relax, like our friend here. But I'm a speculator. I like to think about the unthinkable, terrible, terrible things. What if society crashes totally, unrecoverable internet failure? Could that happen? There are bigger geeks than me in the room. Several very alert people in this area. But I'll just point out that 10 years ago, there was a very elegant virus, the SQL slammer, well, the worm really. It was only 300 bytes in length. A patch had been developed to protect against it 6 months before, but when it was released live, 90% of the susceptible population of SQL servers, database servers of this particular type were infected within 10 minutes, globally. There's no response time to deal with that. People hadn't patched their servers, people got hit. What if? Just think where that would place publishing. Printed knowledge suddenly becomes critical. The little town library that they've made into a tanning salon might suddenly have been quite useful. Think what it does for information professionals. Any librarians in the house? Yay! We salute you. You're going to save the world. And think what it implies for the way we store data and how we manage it. Hands up if you have lost data, sets of data. Old web pages, show of hands, things that have disappeared off the face of the earth, blog sites that have vanished. Yeah. Old media that have become corrupt. Technology that's moved on. I'd like to introduce you to a personal friend of mine. 160 kilobytes of raw power. This holds the Institute annual report for an organisation I used to work for the year 1986. I don't think I'd have much success getting the paper document, which would be quite a job because it's got all sorts of weird notation and stuff in it. To get that back, even if you could read it physically, who's got a copy of the code for a Philips word processor of that era and the ability to decode it? Perishing few people, sadly. Well, how many people have lost, damaged, or yeah? If you've got 32 gig on a micro SD card, it goes through the washing machine without a rattle. Trust me on this. I have direct experience. So what do we do about it? The one thing that concerns me is, will your text, the stuff you feel really, really happy about, will you still be able to retrieve it in 100 years? The Country Diaries that I write for had its century in 2005. And the lovely Martin Wainwright of The Guardian put together a celebration of it with lots of the old columns in it. And because all he had to do was to go to the archive, see the librarian, filter them all out, have them typeset. They even have photographs of some of the original author's notes and things like that. 100 years. How many people are confident that the stuff they're typing today on their blog post, present company accepted, will be usable and readable in that time? Hands up, all of you. I'm seeing half a dozen, maybe. And are you people who have thought about this actually? Yeah, dead serious. Yeah. That's fine for the really, really important stuff. We've got a cloudy future. Being in avarice with house compensations, that's the view from my office window. Everything's going in the cloud. We live in the cloud. What could possibly go wrong? Have you ever read a service level agreement with one of those people? In many cases, they promise you absolutely nothing, only that they might look after your stuff for a while, unless they don't. Look at them carefully, you'll be surprised. We don't necessarily know which of the 1,000 pebbles on the beach, that are the things we've written or saved or whatever, are going to be the ones that cut up and get really, really shiny. Or, what practical utility this has, I don't know, I'm a bloke, but my future daughter-in-law thinks it's very nice, and don't try taking it away from her. But the 999 other ones that are on the beach, if you'd cut them, wouldn't have polished up as anything like this. Messages can be ambiguous. I'm still wondering exactly what the National Trust meant about this, but it's a bit scary. Just don't visualise it before lunch. I'm not saying that the internet is going to collapse today or tomorrow, maybe Monday, I don't know. But isn't it worth, before we commit our collective thinking to something beyond our individual control, you ever think about it? How much do we, it's about trust again, how much do we trust these people? Technology has limitations. Look at the bottom line, below the barcode. There's a story here. Technology can be very vulnerable. This is a fibre optic cable that connected two halves of a major organisation. It got chewed through by rats living in ducts underground. There was another cable, yes, but it was in the same duct, it got chewed as well. Traditional thinking, librarians, put your hands up again, can really, really help. This is the Copyright Library, the National Library of Wales, one of those great institutions. They collect everything. Every book, magazine, paper that's published in the UK automatically goes to the copyright libraries. They're looking at digitisation. They're looking at digital capture. Things like the Wayback Machine, ways of capturing entire web content. But their budget is very limited. The clock is ticking. We don't know when the gust of wind is going to blow all the seeds off the dandelion and just be left with a stalk. It's an allegory, I know. But there's always another way of getting things done. Anybody except Timo can speculate as to what this guy's doing. My friend Simon making ice cream in sunny Silicon Valley. It worries me more that big thing of liquid nitrogen rattled all the way through Silicon Valley in the back of his station wagon before he got there. What could possibly go wrong? Here's a thought for you before you have lunch. The Apollo Moon program only happened in the form it did and the timescale it did because of the preparatory work that's been done by von Braun and his team generating the V weapons, the terror weapons at the end of the Second World War. How about if something similar could happen with data capture? There are suggestions that various national organisations, international organisations from many countries, are collecting large volumes of digital data on a routine basis. Who knew? The hardware, the technology, the people, the expertise to do this is already publicly owned. We paid for it through our taxes if it exists. Wouldn't it be jolly if we could use this accumulated technology put under public control, under some sort of agreement, some sort of consortium of ethical supervision, to capture everything that happens on the internet that we want to keep. The stuff we don't know we want yet, the 999 pebbles that might not be of any use but are there anyway. Why not? You could build a full-scale Wayback Machine of absolutely everything that happened. We tell the technology is there. What could possibly go wrong? It's certainly a better thing than just randomly choosing people's phone calls. These are the things I believe are important in the future of publishing. Publishing must be fair. It must be open and transparent. Publishers, and that probably means all of us in future, in one way or another, must be answerable to society. What I'm not saying there is censorship. I'm saying answerable. So saying why something ought to be published. It must be effective, it must reach the people that need it, and I believe we need robust mechanisms to protect that knowledge in perpetuity, which probably means having some sort of massive offline storage that we don't yet know about. But don't worry, because the University of Rural England will always be here to help. This is their emblem, the red kite. They didn't realise at the time they chose it that it is, in fact, carrion feeder, and just tears to pieces small, helpless furry animals, which isn't really the impression they were trying to give. They wanted strength and fortitude. We still have a beautiful planet, and 2 of these pictures are actually taken in the UK, so that's even better. Yeah. And books will always have fans, so it's really not a problem. Everything is going to be fine. We'll still have some books. The important thing, I think, is that we believe in people. There are whole new generations of really, really talented engineers, scientists, scholars coming through. All us bald-bearded fat people, and I'm speaking about myself now, have hopefully some information to pass on to them in the way they might think about not repeating our mistakes. But I'm happy to hand over to them, because the people coming up through the universities now are far better than I ever was, I'm very glad to say. So, do contact me the rest of the day, blah blah blah, questions, available for wedding photography, bar mitzvahs, anything. No job too small. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Are there any questions for John before lunch? Yes, lady at the front. Oh, right, sorry, at the back first, then lady at the front.
Thank you. It's a very interesting talk, and I particularly like the 5.25-inch floppy disk that you've got there.
This is an
8-inch floppy disk.
Oh yes. Size isn't everything, but.
Yeah. I've heard it said that we are perhaps coming out of the digital dark ages, where much of what we created during the 20th century may well be lost because the technology has moved on and we didn't need to update file formats and things like that. But that's just a comment. So my question is about creating permanent records of information. What's your take, perhaps, then on Flocks and Portico and the other kind of archive and archive projects that are being used to hopefully document scientific records?
I think it's an excellent thing, but like all excellent things, it's still developing. You're looking at particular things. I think we need to be looking at a global solution. I think so much of what we're liable to lose is the ephemeral stuff, and that's what really worries me. Things like there are university collections of manuscript copies of famous authors and the stuff they threw away, which allows us to see their thought processes in how they developed their final version which got printed. Yes, you can do that by change control techniques and so forth. Digging into the files, see how the changes were made. But the example I'd give is the National Library of Wales. When I moved there and went there first, I discovered they had the papers of a relative of mine, a guy called Idris Davis, who was a poet in the Welsh Valleys, a coal miner. And he achieved global fame in the valley that he lived in. Now, he's a national figure, and people are coming and reading his original notes and his letters, which are sat in a box file on a shelf. Where's the equivalent of that? Where are his tweets going to be accessible, the current version of him? His blog posts, some of which may be curated, some not. I think we need to look at the big picture to give ourselves a massive project as publishers. Physicists have grand unified theories, or at least they used to. I don't know what the current thinking is. Where's ours? And surely that should be the collection of global human knowledge and its preservation.
I'm really happy that you have touched upon the wider context of social implementation of technological impact of the publishing, because very often I think that researchers tend to forget about focusing on methods and all the technology, forgetting the way in which it can impact on the social life of people. and I'm speaking from the perspective of digital humanities at the moment, because that's what I'm writing about. I would like to ask you, as a writer, in what way do you think that technology and the wider implications of data, data mining, for example, and the ways in which we process information will influence the discipline of literature and humanities?
Now and into the future, or in the last 20 years? I mean, writing has changed. When I started, you'd usually send a speculative letter to an editor, and they would reply saying, maybe something like that might be interesting. Show me 1,000 words, no promises. And you'd write 1,000 words, then you'd have to type them. If you were lucky, you had a word processor. Then you had to find someone with a printer good enough to impress an editor, which meant a daisy wheel printer, which was very slow and very expensive. Then they'd write back to you saying, we'll keep it on file, and then you'd never hear from them again. Now you email them and they ignore you. You email them and they ignore you. They usually have a filter that, you know, if you send more than 3 messages, you either get blacklisted or they answer you. There's no way of knowing which it's going to be. And eventually you get in touch with them. So the technologies have changed, but some of the processes don't. It takes longer. I mean, my first article in New Scientist in 1988 was called How Good Are Your Data?, which was about something rather similar to this. And I got the letter accepting it after I'd been to the newsagent and found it in the copy on the shelf, which not only confused me, but it annoyed the hell out of my boss. So things have changed, and will continue to, in the same.
Yeah, but I'm more interested in the way in which computer sciences are part of the techno-capitalism, in a sense that we need to realize, we talked about surveillance, for example. Computers are arguably the biggest tool of surveillance in the West.
Yeah, but there's always been surveillance, and people allow it to happen. I mean, these Germans didn't need computers to create huge files on each individual because of the person in the street who was collecting the information about them. Those files are now in public hands, thankfully. But it's humanity that allows that to happen. We either change it or we don't. The fact that the technology exists isn't a justification, although it is often used as one. You know, a project a few years ago to collect the number plates of cars going down a road using ANPR, automatic number plate recognition. It was supposed to be saved for 6 weeks and then ditched if there wasn't a valid reason for keeping it. During the project, they discovered, if I'm correct, that the same amount of money would buy them 2 years worth of storage because this technology would become cheaper. So they kept it for 2 years until the Information Commissioner said, excuse me, I don't think so, and made them get a justification for doing that. People can change things. Technology has been invented, you can't uninvent it.
On that note, that's a very good point to end for lunch. But first of all, thank you very much again to John. Just a couple of things very quickly, sorry, before you go. I forgot to mention earlier, but you may have noticed that some of us have little coloured tabs on our badges. Those with the bright pink tabs are speakers, and those with the purple tabs like mine are organisers. So feel free to direct your questions and seek people out appropriately. I just also have to say one more thing, and in the next session you'll notice on your programmes that it's got Jenny Todd from Cangate speaking. Unfortunately, about 2.5 hours ago, Jenny's assistant phoned me and told me that Jenny was actually in an accident today. She's okay, she's absolutely fine, but she's had to go to hospital, she's got bumps and bruises. So unfortunately, she won't actually be speaking this afternoon. So I think hopefully everyone will join me in hoping that Jenny has a speedy recovery. And she says she will write up her notes and everything from her talk afterwards that will be available to people. But of course, she won't be able to join us this afternoon. So what we're going to do instead is Corey has very kindly agreed to extend his talk time a bit, so we will be hearing a bit more from him, and the session will continue as normal, apart from not having Jenny.